All right, hello 3D people. Today I'm going to cover Cinema4D and switching from that to Blender 2.81. I used Cinema4D for maybe 5 or 6 years and was always tempted to jump over to Blender. I finally did about 6 months ago, and I'll basically just cover the UI, the differences, what Blender is really better at, and then also talk about some things that Cinema 4D has that Blender doesn't. And feel free to ask any question in the live chat, and I'm happy to answer. Um, so yeah, this is what a brand new project looks like in Cinema. As you know, this is what a new one looks like in Blender. It just starts with a default cube, a camera, and a light. In Cinema, oh yeah, also on the bottom left I have sort of my whatever key I press will show up there, so you can figure out what shortcuts I'm doing. So I'm gonna basically try and systematically go through the main tools I use in Cinema and try and recreate it or replicate it in Blender, so you kind of get a sense of how you do things in the other program. So the first thing is creating geometry. Right now we just have a blank scene. So right here we have obviously a geometry tab. We can create a bunch of shapes. You use Cinema, so you know what all these shapes are. So in Blender we have something similar, but you have to do Control, or it's actually Shift A, and then you have the ability to basically a very similar menu in terms of like creating curves or meshes. And you'll notice the set of meshes that come are a little different. So we don't have a capsule. I don't think what we have what they call a gas tank, and we also don't have like a train object. And there's also, I guess, one added one, which is this monkey, Suzanne. So again, you just do Shift A and you can get all that geo. If you do want to have, let's say, a capsule, you can, well, I'll go over these shortcuts in a minute, but you can, as you might assume, you could go ahead and just like bevel it out, and then you have a cylinder or a capsule. Ooh. Okay. So let's see what else there is. So there's, yeah, the other thing we don't have is a figure. I love the figure object in Cinema 4D. I usually, if I'm making like an interface for VR, I like to have a figure in there just to get a sense of scale to speed things up. With Blender, again, we don't have that, so I usually just do like a cube, and then I would set the height to something like 6 feet, so I know it's 6 feet tall, and then I would scale it, and then basically that's my fictional human character. So yeah, I mean, there are some nice things with the additional primitives. I know a lot of people, especially motion graphics people, use the train object. There's lots of other ways to create trains, and I guess I'll cover that in a little bit when we get into sculpting and deformers in Blender. So I'll delete that. So what else do we have in here? The next one is, yeah, splines. So in particular, Cinema is really good when it comes to their splines. You can do a lot of really cool things. Let's just like draw something in 3D, and we're going to sweep, and we'll sweep the circle around it. And I think I put that in the wrong order. What am I doing wrong? Okay, yeah, there's going to be lots of little things that I mess up in here. Let's try this one more time. Delete that. And add a circle. There we go. I think I had the scale wrong or the order wrong. So yeah, in Blender, let's do that. We would add a curve. So you see there's no like pen tool. You kind of have to start with either a circle or kind of like this shape. This is one kind of frustrating thing about Blender. It defaults into this spline, which is to me a little bit of a weird shape to default to. I prefer just a straight line. But if you want to add to this, you basically hit E, which is the extrude command, and then you could create shapes that way. And again, I've been using Blender 6 months, so there may be better ways to do some of this stuff, but from doing, I think, a lot of tutorials recently, while it's fresh in my head, it's good to just show what I've learned. So, oh yeah, so this is a big thing also in Blender. Basically, we have these tabs. This is the object tab, the Deformer modifier tab. This is the kind of like effector, force field, physics tab. This one is constraints, so you can have like, you know, like attach things to other objects, or if you're creating like a camera system and you want to constrain it to a path, it would be in there. And then this is kind of like a contextual tab. So you'll see if I just make a cube real quick. This one is a little bit different. This is more about vertex groups or vertices. And you have things like figuring out what your normals are, UV maps. You can also create shape keys, which is the same as blend shapes. But back to the curve. So the curve has its own like curve tab. And in here we have geometry. So I'm going to actually create another circle, and in our splines curve tab, geometry, I'm going to do bevel. Sometimes it doesn't select, so you have to like drag it in there. Or am I doing the wrong one? Geometry, extrude. Oh, I have the wrong. There we go. Okay, it's extruding that. There we go. So you basically take a bevel object. The language is a little bit different, but you know, you can essentially get the same result. One thing, I guess there's two things about Blender. On one hand, it's very gestural. There's a lot of shortcuts you need to learn, like using G for move, S for scale, tab to go between object and edit mode, which you can tell in the top left corner here. You can also press 1, 2, actually it won't work with the spline, but I'll create a cube again. In edit mode, you can also do 1 for vertex selection, 2 for edge selection, and 3 for face selection. And then you can toggle back with just a tab, which is really nice. So I personally think this is like a huge benefit over Cinema4D. For example, yeah, just if you're modeling, you can just like quickly gesturally extrude and rotate. This is using G to move, R to rotate, and what else did I do? I did E for extrusion. You can also hold Alt and click to do loop selections. So in Cinema, you have to go through a little bit more of a menu to get to some of this stuff. So for example, I guess let's just go back to Cinema and make a cube. So if I want to go into like vertex or like object versus edit mode, I click enter, and then I can press enter again to toggle through those three. I find it really frustrating because there's no way to auto toggle back to object mode. And also I can't, let's say, jump between face to point. So I'm always just like tapping at return frantically to try and get what I'm trying to do. Oh, and then also with Cinema, you have to press C or this thing, which basically converts it into an editable object. And then I can do basically the same thing where I hold control here and I can rotate. And if I want to do a loop selection, I have to press U, which is basically all my selection tools, and click L, and then I can do these loop selections. So for me, I think it's gotten a lot, my workflow has gotten a lot quicker from just being able to quickly jump between all these. So I think in general for things like box modeling, Blender is really nice. And I guess, you know, there's things we love about Cinema, like I can put in a Sub-D surface modifier and this non-destructive ability to modify geometry. So Blender has the same thing in here, their modifier tab. You can go to Subdivision. There we go. You notice by default, Cinema has like a Phong material on its objects, which basically smooth out the normals. And in Blender, they by default don't. I actually think it's nice not to have it, because when you're trying to lay out the geometry, it's really helpful just to actually see what the underlying geo looks like. But you can always just right click, and the first option is shade smooth, which does the exact same thing. Shade flat, shade smooth. And then also in here, if I want to change the normals, like the angle which the normals get bent, I can, or get smooth, I can do it right here. So this would be the same 40. I can do 40. Kind of see. I think, yeah, I guess maybe the normal algorithm is a little different. It needs a little bit more of an angle. But yeah, I guess you can obviously do the same thing, at least for box modeling, with both of these tools. I'll also show another thing. I'm going to just delete this. We'll create another cube. Delete this. Create another cube. All right, so I'm going to make this editable by clicking C. And then I'm going to do a M for all the like mesh editing tools. And I'm going to do the K, and then pretty sure it was, yeah, I think, I always forget now because I've been using Blender. If I need to do K twice for a loop cut, oh, there we go, and then L. So then I could just do a loop cut there. In Cinema, you can kind of edit where your loop cut is, and I think you just click again, or you press enter. And actually, I forget, you know, I've been using Blender now for not that long, but I am starting to forget how to use Cinema4D. Well, okay. Yeah, sorry, I used to be super able to flow with Cinema, but I've definitely gotten slower. So let's go back to selection tool, and I'll just delete these vertices and add a mirror object, or symmetry, they call it symmetry. So now I have an object where I can just, let's say, take this face, and extrude it, and you kind of see this thing, I think it was S or MS for bevel, and then inner, I'm trying to remember how to do an inner extrude inner W. So yeah, these are tools that I used to use all the time. I can do another inner, pull this up, maybe do a bevel MS. Okay, so I guess this is a similar, or a common way of modeling, and I'm also going to just put a symmetry on it, so you kind of get a sense of what you're probably used to and how we now do that in Blender. So yeah, there's a few things here. Let's just have, okay, the x-axis on the right. So I'd go into edit mode and I'd do Control R, and then I would click, and now I can move it wherever I want. If I hold Control, it's going to basically snap, and if I hold Shift, it's going to do really small increments. I also think I can actually type on the keyboard different values, and it'll snap to that as well. Another thing, I'm going to just go back, delete that. Okay, I'll add it again with Control R. Another way to just, if you want to just smack in the center, you can just, sorry, I think you just right click, middle click. It's middle click or right click. It's right click. I use a Wacom pen, so it's sometimes hard for me to remember which button's right click, which one's the middle. Okay, so we did that, and then if we want to delete the vertices, we can again go ahead and delete them like that. One nice thing also about Blender is if you do Alt-Z, you kind of get this like X-ray view, so you can actually select vertices that are obscured by the front face here. And another way to do it is just right up here on the button on the top right. And here you also have wireframe mode, diffuse, textured, but more in like an unlit state. And then this one's kind of this one is rendered view. And I guess similar in Cinema, you have your options right here in display. But yeah, this transparent mode is really helpful, and I use it all the time when modeling. But we're going to delete all of these because we're going to try and make that same shape. We're going to go into modifiers, we're going to do mirror, and then we're going to do, I guess let's do it in the same order we did before. So we basically just extruded a few times. We did the extrude inner. For that, I'm going to just do extrude and then scale it. Bring that in. Bring it up. And we're also going to bevel it. So I'm going to do Control B for bevel. And if I use the scroll bar, I can choose how many or how many subdivisions there are in the bevel, but I'm going to default to none. So this, now we have a similar shape, and I'm going to add a subdivision surface. So we end up with a very similar thing. Only thing is it's not smooth. And one thing to note with the modifier panel, so the order of these matter, and you can reorder them by pressing up and down here. So you'd always want to mirror something before subdividing it. Otherwise you're subdividing what's underneath and then mirroring it. Sometimes it works out, but sometimes you get some weird geometry in the center of your seam. Okay, I'm going to just keep going, but again, feel free to ask any question you'd like. And if I'm going too fast, feel free to stop me. I guess one thing I love about Cinema was, let me remember, yeah, you press Shift-C and you can just enter a command, so you could do like mirror tool, you could do, basically you could get anything working here. So Blender has the same thing. If you press F3, you basically can you can get almost everything here. The thing that I usually do most is like set origin. Origin is what they call a pivot point. So I could set it to the center of the volume, or I could set it to this thing called a 3D cursor. That's one new concept. This gizmo that you see right here is a 3D cursor. it's currently placed at the origin of the whole scene, but you could actually move around this 3D cursor to help like get a pivot point in a specific place. All right. So we've gone over some geometry, some box modeling, some curves. We went over modifiers. So yeah, one thing Blender doesn't have is this whole volume builder, volume meshers, but they do have really good sculpting tools. So I think a lot of times you don't even need this. I'm gonna try and be systematic. Let's just go through some of these, and then we can go into probably some sculpting, some rigging, and then maybe motion tracking or Mograph and then motion tracking and even particles. There's kind of a lot to go over. But still, you know, even though Cinema can do everything, I still am very happy that I moved to Blender, and it's not just because it's free. In general, I think it does a lot of things better. And maybe I should just focus on that. But yeah, I guess we'll show one more thing because we're looking at the deformers here. So one thing that's like classic Cinema4D is you basically make a shape. Let me go to display with lines. I just basically subdivided this a bunch, and I'm going to scale it. Oh, I'm going to scale it and then make it editable. And then you add this this bend modifier to it, and it's all, at least for me, it's always in the wrong freaking orientation. I guess that's good. And then I'm gonna do fit to parent and kind of do things like this. Has some weird stretching, so you just click this and it'll bend more appropriately. So the bend deformer is like one thing that really is not great in Blender. So I'm gonna just go ahead and make a bunch of subdivisions, I think it's right click. And then in here there is, where is it? You probably see it and I don't. Smooth, simple deform. Okay, that's it. So if I'm in edit mode, you kind of see the original mesh, but if I click tab and I'm back in object mode here, I can see what the final result is. So by default, it has kind of like a twist thing going on. It has 3 types. Here's the bend. Again, I guess just like Cinema, it is in the wrong orientation, and because the bend tool lives in this deformer, it's actually quite hard to like rotate it and get it to be as I would like. So yeah, that's one thing that's really nice about Cinema. They have like this visual gizmo to represent each modifier. In Blender, there's no visual representation of the modifier, so I can't just use the wizard to move it around. Instead, I have to actually like move the geometry, and in general, that creates more guessing work. And I think this is kind of like the biggest con. So yeah, but I guess we should also, let's see, what else do we have? We have displacers, so let's add a displacer. Shading, I'll just add some noise. Our geometry doesn't have that much going on, but let's just displace it more. Oh yeah, I guess one thing I used to always use in Cinema, I would again, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's middle click or right click, but I would just jump between the different different viewports like this. But with Blender, there's actually, in the rotation, if you just hold Alt while rotating, you can just snap to whichever angle you want, and the camera also snaps into orthographic view. So I really love that because I can pop in and out from perspective and orthographic. You can also use this like wizard up here if you want. So like if you don't have a tablet, I think a lot of people use this to drive the interface. Okay, I'm gonna go over one other thing that kind of took me a while to figure out in Blender and drove me nuts for a while, to be honest. And then we'll get back to this shape, but it's the camera. So in Cinema, I always love the camera system. You can pop in and out of the camera, and when you're in the camera, you can move it around and pop back out. So here's the camera. You think it's very similar. There's this camera icon here, so if I click that, I can pop in and out. But if I move, like the camera viewport doesn't move with me. And for the longest time, I was like, this is so frustrating because at least being used to Cinema, it's so great to like move and position your camera exactly how you want it. And I Googled this a bunch, saw a bunch of tutorials, and everyone saying that for the most part, they just move the viewport to where they want it, and then they search the command like camera, where is it? Camera fit to selected, is that it? No. Camera, set active object as camera, align, oh there it is, align camera to view. And now, oh, the camera's there, but it's pretty frustrating. And also you don't see what the image ratio will be like until you're actually in it. So how can you actually like line up your shot and make it look good? But there is a way to do it, and I really wish this was default in Blender, but there's this little arrow here. Basically every window has that, but if you press N, it toggles it, or you can click it. And you go to View, and then lock camera to view. And now I can actually, just like Cinema, compose and choose my shot, and the camera actually moves with me. I can close this back up, and it will still behave that way. But yeah, that was one thing that threw me off for a while. I'm gonna just take a sip of water. Again, if you're watching this, feel free to ask any questions. We have 7 people watching the stream right now, which is the most I've ever had. So yeah, let's keep going. And if you hear that in the background, there's a helicopter flying by. So yeah, we added the bend deformer. There's a lot of cool deformers in here, like, and not all, and some of them are, yeah, some of them are very different from Cinema. So like, for instance, one really nice one, I'm gonna just create a plane. But if I put this solidify modifier on it, you'll see it gives it some thickness. So that's like really cool if you're trying to model, let's say, like a t-shirt. So if I'm gonna hide this. Basically, I can toggle it off, but keep it there by just doing this. This is like display. This is render. So if I render this, it would still show up. So I could toggle them both, or I could. So yeah, let's just like quickly make. Let me get back into. Trying to think the best way to make a t-shirt here. I'm gonna make a really, really bad t-shirt. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool things about Blender. Like that is one of them. That I could just select that point, click F, and it fills it in with a polygon. Or I could actually take these two edges, I just press F, and again it bridges it. So there's a lot of like really magical modeling tools, and in general, if you do a lot of box modeling, Blender's way better. So this stream is just going to be tangent after tangent, but for instance, if you have this, you know, in Cinema you have to like bridge each of these, you have to bridge each of these individually. But in Blender, I can just Alt-click and it'll automatically select those loops. And then I could do something called grid fill, and it just fills it in, which is ridiculously cool. Okay. Oh, so yeah, let's, yeah, that is one funny thing about Blender, that you can basically create objects within an object. There's basically there's like three things that really tripped me up when I started Blender. One was that camera thing that I showed you. The other was when you're in object mode and you create another object, they appear separate. So we have two distinct objects, sphere, so let's just call them 1 and 2. Let's delete, I guess this one's, I labeled that one too. So now if I go into edit mode, and you know, I can do whatever I want to this, but let's say I want to create another sphere. This actually didn't create a second sphere object. This is all part of the same geometry. So when I click tab back to object mode, now both of these are part of the same thing. So it's just something to be careful of, I think, when creating new geometry. Just make sure you're in object mode. I could always separate this out as well. So I just, I'm actually going to go into X-ray mode. I'll copy it. I'll click X, and I'll delete faces. Click tab back to object mode, and yeah, I need to paste it onto an existing mesh. I think if I have this clicked, okay, maybe that doesn't work. There was a cool thing about copying and pasting that Blender could do. I actually don't remember right now. Okay, so yeah, that was the second thing that tripped me up. This idea that you can create objects within other objects. What was the third one? I'm trying to remember now. Oh yeah, so the whole idea of scaling. So let's say I make a cube and I make it really big, and select this face, go to edge mode, Control B for bevel. You see, like, this isn't a proportional bevel. This is like a really odd ratio because I scaled this object. But I want like a nice clean bevel. So the way to do that, if you look over here in the object tab, I've scaled, it's basically 1, 1, and I've scaled this. If you have to click Control A, and this is and I can choose basically what I want to normalize. So I'm going to normalize scale, and now it perceives this as 1. And now when I click bevel, it does it as I would expect. Yeah, so those are the three main things that trip me up, and it was just like, why do I have to click Control A all the time whenever I want to do a bevel? Still honestly not sure. I'm sure someone who knows Blender better might have a reason why that is helpful, but to me it usually trips me up. Yeah, I guess there's a bunch of really cool things about Blender. I should just start to show some of that, because in the modifier I could do, actually I'm going to first go into like render mode, and let me add a light. So I'm going to add a light right here. Let's do, sorry, I want to actually a sunlight. Let's rotate it. I'll move it up so you can kind of see what's going on. And maybe I'll add a point light also. I always like to have a kick light. Okay. So I can do, in this cube, I can go to Bevel. I'm going to Control A, scale it again. So now the bevels are all even. And I'm going to lower it a little bit and increase the segments. So this is just a bevel modifier. The geometry is still just a cube. But for like hard surface modeling, you can do some crazy cool stuff really easily. I'm going to just make some random geometry. And in the materials, I'll just create a new material. Let's add a color. In general, you can do some really nice hard surface modeling in here. So these up here, basically these are all based on the objects. So like, as you saw with meshes, there's this contextual vertice group, but in general right here is basically the mesh, the key mesh things like object modifiers. So yeah, we went through that. Up here, these things don't change. So this is like the world color, basically this like gray color in the background. And then this is, I guess, scene properties. I actually haven't touched this at all yet. So I guess you can change your metric system or your unit system. But the two main ones I use are basically this one, which is like saving an image, what your image ratio would be, and also your render properties. So by default, it uses this thing called Eevee, which is like their real-time renderer. It's kind of like Unity or Unreal, where you just see everything in real time. You'll notice that shadows do resolve themselves in like a fraction of a second, so you do get slightly nicer shadows than you would in a game engine. But they have all these parameters like bloom. Let's bump up one of these lights a little bit. So you see the lights have this special tab for a light bulb. This might be too much, but let's go to bloom. You see now we have like this hazy bloom on everything. We have AO, screen space reflections, which you're starting to see right here. There's also amazing volumetrics. I'm trying to show you guys stuff, but I'm realizing like everything in Blender is so interconnected that to show you it, I have to kind of like keep introducing you to brand new things. So let's just create a cube again, put that material that I had just made, I'll add a light. So up here in the top, you see there's a bunch of different things. There's layout, modeling, sculpting, UV editing, texture painting, shading, animation, yada, yada, yada. So it's the same thing as basically this, except these tabs are like a lot more powerful. So like for instance, shading, we can select this object and we have this whole like shader graph system. I know Cinema has shader graph also, but the way Blender does it is really nice because there's a lot of different parts of the app that use shaders, or actually, sorry, a node-based graph system. And they all behave very, very similar. So it's really nice. You learn it once and you can use it in here. You can use it in compositing and so forth. Let's go back to shading. So yeah, I can basically just like, in here again, you always click Shift A to create a new anything. And I could do like search, and I'll do a color ramp. And I'll just choose some some colors. I don't know why I keep clicking magenta. Okay. And I could do like layer weight, so then I have this thing for Fresnel effects, and then I can put it into color. And now I have this like, when there's a steep angle between the camera and the normal, there's this orange color, and when there isn't, there's the blue. Let's just put it on a sphere as well so you can see it. So now I have this Fresnel effect. Okay, I see one question. Hey Robbie, can you show how to make edge polygon selections and apply a modifier only to that selection, like in Cinema4D? Right, okay, yeah, so in Cinema4D, I actually don't know if I know how to do this in Blender, but let's just quickly try. In Cinema4D, I think this is what you're asking. Let me know if I'm wrong. Sorry, I need to make it editable. I can do like select, set, selection, and now I have this group, and I'll say my selection. Actually, I'm gonna make this a few more. And let's just extrude it. And UL, select, set selection, okay. Okay, so now I have this selection tag. I can double click, I have that. And I think I can now do some, I think this is what you're asking. Let me know if I'm wrong. But you could, let's see, apply modifiers only to that selection. So I think the idea might be, let me know, actually, if you're still watching, let me know which modifier you're thinking about. I think these are deformers, so these, they do have a selection as well. So this is Cinema's Bevel. And then let's see what happens if I just put it in here. That doesn't do it. Let me see which one. I know like the cloner, you can all my shortcuts are way slower now that I'm used to the Blender ones. But I know in here I could do like object, and then I could just set it to that one thing. And then you'd only clone objects over there. Like making an edge selection, set selection, and only bevel those edges. And only bevel that edges. So I think you might be asking, so if I do UL, and let's say I click that, and then I do MB, I think it's B, no, MS, and now I just bevel that. Is that what you're talking about? I know it looks bad because I'm on a sphere right now. MB kind of, or sorry, MS, like that. I think that's what you're asking about. Unless you're talking about a specific modifier. With the bevel deformer, okay. So let's see if we can do that. Set selection, bevel, and so right now it's beveled the whole thing, but let's increase the offset. Does this work? It does work, okay. Okay, so that's the question. Yeah, Cinema has this really nice way of like selecting and saving those selections. I think you can do that. Well, okay, we got a cube right here. So I can select this. So there is no like, let's see what we have here. Yeah, I believe it's in here, and I can like, let's see what happens. Yeah, so I basically can set a selection like that. I'll just do it again so you can see. So I'm basically selecting this edge, and then under vertex groups, I click plus and assign. And now basically if nothing's selected and I can click select, it'll remember that selection. Now the question is, can we apply this group to that modifier? And I don't know the answer. So let's find out. Where are you, Bevel? Here you are. Okay. So here's the bevel. Limit. Let's see, yeah. How would I apply this modifier just to that vertex group? I actually don't know if you can do that. If you're watching and you know Blender and you know how to do it, let me know. Or let us know. Yeah. Oh, vertex group. And now we didn't, let's just name our group, so we call it like one edge. Okay. And then here I click one edge, boom. Blender's just as good. No. But it is able to do that. Okay. That's nice. Thank God I'm using Blender. So yeah, that's how you do it. It's kind of fun. We both learned something. Cool. So I'll go back to shading. Again, I'll try and be as quick as I can. This tool is massive. There's so much cool stuff. So just kind of explaining that you can do a bunch of really cool stuff with graph systems. And, you know, one thing that's just wild, to me at least in Blender, is there's a shader system for the materials of an object, but there's also a shading system for the lighting of the world. And in the lighting of the world, there's this world output and there's volume. So I can actually do scatter volume, and I can plug this in, and I'm gonna bump up. Oh, sorry, I need a. So this is, again, I was in like look dev mode, and now I'm back. Now I'm in rendered mode. So now, like, you can't see anything. I'm gonna lower my density to like 0.1, and I'm gonna make the density like, I don't know what we're going for, Blade Runner vibes. So it doesn't look that cool right now. I'm gonna delete this. I'm gonna add a point light. And maybe let's bump up the density to, I'm trying to remember what the default scatter volume default is 1. Okay, so you can't see anything. I'm basically just bumping up the brightness of this light bulb. Let's make this like 0.6 or 0.3. Okay, look at this. We have like volumetric light with God rays showing up in real time. To me, this is just really freaking cool. Let's change. So you can get like crazy stuff, and you actually know what it's gonna look like before you render. So I don't know if it's coming through in the stream, but there's like these really nice shadows that kind of fall off this thing. Yeah, and this is all using the Eevee render system. Eevee's the real-time one, but they also do have this thing that is just like Octane, an unbiased real-time ray tracing engine. So all I need to go do is in this camera, click cycles, and you see it's going to be a little slow because I'm streaming, but it's basically real-time and it's photoreal. Oh, sorry, I need to click this and just shade that smooth. So you can get like gorgeous renders. Just download it and use it. But honestly, this is, they had comparisons of this to Redshift, and this renders the same quality but faster. It's a little bit faster. There's so much crazy stuff about this. One thing that I love is that, in Cinema4D, if you're using Redshift or Octane, the whole material system's different from the standard renderer. With this, I could just switch between Eevee and cycles, and I don't need to change the material at all. They have these like things called principled BSDF shader, and it works in both renderers. So that's what I love. I can just like work in Eevee the whole time and then just switch it to cycles and get the high res render. The other crazy thing is these nodes. So like, I'm gonna go into cycles again. I'm gonna drop the samples. We're in the viewport right now, so I'm gonna just do like 16. I wanted to come through in YouTube, so I'm gonna drop it to 8. So you get like a pretty grainy image. So they have this like Intel Denoise machine learning algorithm built into Blender. And since we learned a little bit of nodes, we can go into this compositing tab, which is basically like a full-on video editor if you want it. But basically all I ever do is denoise. And you basically just throw this node in between. And even though it's a grainy image, it's going to render pretty much perfect. So I'm going to just do render image right up here. Oh, I forgot I didn't move the camera. So let's go back here. And now let's do render image. So it looks grainy. And then a second later, you see that? It smooths it out and it looks perfect. Which is just crazy to me. Another reason I love Blender. But there's two other things that I think Blender just destroys cinema at. And I'll show you those now. So if I create, let's say I create a face, or I'm sorry, I keep deleting and re-adding lights. Okay, and if I go to UV editing, everyone knows Cinema sucks at UV editing. I hate UV editing. So this is like a default geo, and they've UV'd it correctly. So I'm gonna just like screw that up. I'm just gonna do like cylindric projection. So you press U in UV editing, and you can get like your standard projections. So like, sorry. I would always go into Cinema and I would do UV edit, and then I would go to projection, go to object, click it potentially, okay. And then I need to go to UV, and then I would just like click these and like, oh, I'm just trying to find something that works. And like this is the worst because there's no real way to like move these with any precision or snapping. It's just like, I had to use Maya before Cinema just for like a little bit, and I was always jealous that like, why can't I make proper UVs? Because sometimes it just really sucks. So Blender has this really cool thing called seams. So basically, I just did a loop selection, and if I click U, I can add a seam, mark seam. So now it shows up as red. And now if I were to UV project, I'm going to do a smart UV projection. So now it basically cut it right here and then opened it up. But you know, because there's so many folds, it's actually quite difficult for it to even get this correctly. So I'm actually going to do a seam around the ear. I know most people who use Cinema are just like, they're making cool motion graphic stuff. They don't necessarily want to be like a perfect like 3D character artist, but like this stuff comes in handy to have. So mark a seam around there, and I'll actually mark a seam. You basically mark seams wherever you want, but if you do it, oh sorry, I need to click Smart UV Project and kind of see how things are different. Oh, what just, oh, sorry guys, I for some reason marked every edge as a seam. That's why it looked bananas. Okay, so now this ear is separated. Basically, it lets you make good UVs, and there's a lot of cool things. I can choose like the island margin, so that it can have more space if you want to overdraw, if you have like maps or something. You can do stretch to bounds, or you could not. Yeah, basically just UVing is awesome in Blender. And basically all the same tools you have are right here. Two of which I didn't even show you, which is basically in edit mode. Right here is like proportional editing. So I could go here and basically move it around proportionally. And I mean, Cinema also has this. Let's go here, make a sphere, and I think it's in the selection tool, and then mode, soft selection. And now I can do it as well in Cinema. But like Blender's is next level because they have all these different shapes that you can do. So like I could move it randomly. If you want to create that terrain object, which you don't have in Blender, you just create a plane, random, and move it however you like. You could have, yeah, you get the point. If you play with it, it actually becomes really powerful. And then they also have the snapping. The snapping is way better than Cinema. So in snapping, I can increment, vertex, edge, face. Basically all these just work. For some reason when I was, actually let me turn off proportional. See, like if I put it near another vertex, it just snaps to it. With Cinema, it never really works, to be honest. So like, let's do this. We'll do, it's already on vertex snap, but like, I can't actually, okay. So it does, this is snapping. I remember I had like lots of other issues. Oh, yeah, let's say that now I think I remember what my main issue was with Cinema. Like I want to just like snap it on one angle. Like I want to snap it on this axis, the red x-axis, but I don't want to actually move the point all the way up. I guess it did it right. Okay. Maybe I'm tripping, but, or no, it didn't do it right. Because snapping is on right now, and I see like I can't, I want to just snap this axis so it'd be right under it. So in here I could actually just, I'll click move, and then if I hold middle click and do a gesture any direction, I can choose the axis, it's snapping. Again, it takes a little bit to get used to all this stuff, but it's really helpful, and then I can just put it over that and click. Now I have it right there. With Blender, I like never have issues with snapping, but with Cinema, like it was always a pain, and I could never actually get things the way I wanted. And this specific thing I also wanted to do all the time, which was just like move a vert and then like snap it over here, but I don't actually want it here. But in Cinema, you like had to have it there. Okay. So yeah, let's go into, I think we've covered a crazy amount. Let's just go into sculpting. Yeah, I mean, rigging is also way better in Blender for a lot of reasons. It's like there's too much stuff to show. I've also done motion tracking, but yeah, let's quickly do sculpting. Just go into sculpt mode. So far you're thinking, okay, this is the same as Cinema, except you have like a lot more brushes. So sculpt here. We have just these. We have like pull, grab, inflate. So here we have like proper ZBrush stuff. One thing that like you'll notice is this sphere that I have doesn't have enough geometry, and I can do Control Z to view the wireframe. If I click Dyna Topo, I don't know why I call it Dyna. I can choose detail size. Let's just make it like, I don't know, 6. And now I start to sculpt. You see it looks like a smooth mesh right there. And if I go into the mesh, you see it just subdivided that one area. I can also just show the wireframe if you don't want it. So it's crazy to me. Like that's a really cool thing. So like if you're if you want a little bit of detail somewhere but not have a dense mesh everywhere, this is really powerful. I'm going to turn off the wireframe. So yeah, you can actually make real sculpts with this. And let's see what else we could show you. Like sharp cuts. Sorry, this mesh is, I'm still dyno topping the parts that don't have detail, so it starts out a little funny. We have like snake hook, which comes from ZBrush for like making creatures. We have for hard surface stuff, we have, what do they even call this? Flatten, smooth, fill, scrape. Yeah, I actually use scrape a lot to like create rocks or surfaces. This is like your standard move tool, so like Cinema has this. This thing's really crazy. This is their new pose tool. So if you want to pose something without rigging it, you can do that. And basically just based on the size of the brush, it chooses how far that the, I guess, kind of IK thing will go. So you can quickly pose, and then I can just smooth that out if I want. Pinch, so you can make like little seams. Twirling, which I never use, but I think if you're making a scoop of ice cream or something, you'd want it. I don't really know. And they also have a whole masking system. The inflate brush, which Cinema has. This one's called Blob Inflate. I guess they're both a little different. So yeah, in general, I love just having sculpting when I need it, and then being able to UV when I need it. And the mesh tools in general are also a lot better. The other thing that you can't really do in Cinema is texture paint. So I can do new, main, or I'll just, that's just the name of my texture. I'll add a texture, so I'll just say image texture. And I'll click texture paint up here. It starts out as pink because we don't actually have a texture. And also I need to UV some crazy UVs, but I'll just do smart project. Okay. So, because I had that crazy margin on for no reason before. Because the geo is so much, it takes a second for it to do that. But now I can go into texture paint. And again, I can click N to get the tool palette up, F to change my brush size, and I can do new, diffuse, and I could do whatever, 1024 times 4, 4096. I can copy. Actually in Cinema, or sorry, in Blender, you don't even need to click in to copy. You just hover your mouse, click copy, click paste. It works for everything, colors, values. You can press delete if you want to zero something out. What do we want the background color to be? Let's make it like kind of green. Okay. So now we have this texture, and in here I'm going to set it to here, my diffuse texture. And now I can paint. And just like in Photoshop, you have two colors that you can toggle between by pressing X. So I could make like a little alien character really quickly. And it's pretty quick, as you can see. This is obviously not doing the best job, but you could paint any texture. So you could paint a diffuse map, a metallic map, a bump map, anything. So I just love having it all in the same tool. And interface wise, like I tried ZBrush and I tried Substance Painter, but it's a pain in the ass to like jump between programs all the time, and like toggle the way you're using your mouse and the shortcuts. So I love that I can just use consistent keystrokes and shortcuts for all the tools in the 3D pipeline. Yeah, there's also like fall off. So if you don't want like a soft brush, you could. Oh, sorry. I have strength based on tablet pressure right here. So if I turn that off, it'll be sharper. So this is like a hard edge. This would be a soft edge. And you can actually tweak and change this curve however you want. In stroke, just like in Photoshop, there's like spacing, and there's also smooth stroke. So I can actually draw really smooth lines. And you can change the amount in which it's smooth. So like maybe it's not smooth very much, or it's smooth a lot. I think we covered like probably the majority of stuff. I mean, we didn't do animation and rigging. I'll just note rigging, like the auto weights it does when you just like do the bind or whatever in Cinema. You do the character command bind. Like the auto weights for Blender are 10 times better. Like if you're doing an arm or leg, you don't get all this nasty geo moving as you rotate a bone. And also one really nice thing about rigs in Blender is like, I'm gonna just create one in Cinema first. Character joint, and I usually go in here. I think it's Control or Shift click. Character joint. Man, what am I doing wrong? I haven't used this in, oh, joint tool. Okay, so now I can click. So Cinema has like this thing where like, I don't know, it just, to me, it's always been like kind of annoying because you have this crazy long hierarchy. In Blender, you have like a little bit more control over your joints. Let's see. I haven't actually done rigging in a hot minute, but let's see if we can do it. Is it in here? Armature, yes. So they call it an armature. And you can basically create the same thing. In here, again, we have like the contextual tab, and so this idea of it being connected or not is just like a toggle. So there we go. So now I can actually, I don't know, visually I feel like it's a lot nicer if I want to, let's say, create a character or a spider or whatever. And I don't need to like worry about the layers and the order of things. it does the same thing, to be honest, in here. It ends up creating the same thing, but I feel like it's a little bit more of a visual representation. And you can like toggle into pose mode, and then you can just like rotate things however you want. But when you're back into object mode, oh, let's see. Yeah, just in general, I think it's a lot better. It does do a better job of like retaining the original pose. Like in Cinema, it's always been annoying where once you change it, it like stays there, and then you're like, oh, I want my T-pose back. I'm actually, I've only rigged like, I don't know, 4 things in Blender so far, so I'm probably gonna hold off because I don't want to pretend I know something that I don't. But the things I did rig and I followed tutorials with, I enjoyed the process more, and the results were definitely better. If you do motion graphics, it would be in Movie Clip Editor. You basically like import a video clip, and then you can do your tracking dots and track in here. It's the only other thing, like interface wise, you can have as many windows as you want. So if you do like what Cinema has in terms of like the four views, you could actually get that in here too. And you can merge them or remove them. And I think Cinema is maybe also a little better with the animation timeline, but it's pretty good in here too. Just create keyframes, and then this is like the keyframe editor, but there's also graph editor. So if I were to add a keyframe here, you can kind of see it and tweak it, basically same as Cinema. And you can zoom and pan. So I don't know if I would actually say Cinema's better. I think they're equivalent. And this is like more of an After Effects view, I guess. The dope sheet versus, I forget what they call it now. But I think that's pretty much it. I mean, you get a decent overview. If you're still watching and you have a question, I'm gonna just leave like a minute or 2 to pause and hear whatever you have to ask, and we can take as much time as you want. Yeah, while I wait, I'll just like noodle on some things in here. Try and create some things that we haven't covered, like text. Oh, I guess there is one kind of major thing I didn't talk about, is the Mograph stuff. That's like the bread and butter for everyone in Cinema. So you have a cloner in Blender. You can do Voronoi fractures, but this whole idea of like having effectors compound on each other is less intuitive. But like as I said before, you don't have those gizmos. You can do a lot of the similar stuff. There are some things like particles in Cinema. If you have a particle system and you want them to like, let's say like all fall on a surface, and each particle has a rigid body, so they respect each other, they bounce off each other. In Blender, each particle can't have a rigid body, so then you get like overlapping particles. They can have like geometry, like they could each particle can be a cylinder, but the cylinders will overlap. So that was like one thing that bothered me. Man, I feel like I did a lot of talking. Hopefully this was useful to someone. It took me about a month of straight using Blender to like really love it. The first 2 weeks I was like, oh man, I could just do this in Cinema so much quicker. I was so slow and thinking I made a bad choice, and obviously I wouldn't recommend it if you have like a tight project deadline. But if you have a few weeks or you want to try it on your weekends, I think it's worth the switch. I think we covered all these tabs really. We didn't do modeling tab. I've never clicked modeling tab. I just model in the layout tab. Looks the same, to be honest, because it just gives more space for this. There's also this grease pencil thing, which I have never used, to be honest, but I see people like, I never know how to pronounce his name. It's like Jama Jarabov, who makes really awesome 2D work in Blender. You can do 2D cell animation in Blender, and like I said, you can do video editing. Here's like your classic metaball, which people love from Cinema, and obviously you can change the resolution of these and scale. Empty objects. It's kind of nice if you're rigging and you want like certain or to see gizmos for what you're controlling. Surface I've never used, but it looks like it's more like CAD style modeling, which is kind of wild. So does Blender have any kind of cloner effector equivalent? Okay, yeah, let's check it out. So I'm gonna make the classic, let's do a cone instead. Oh, it's creating it over here because the origin moved over here. Or clear origin. Oh, what was it? What did I want to do? Set origin. Okay, whatever. I'll just leave it like that. But in the modifier, I have, where is it? Array. So here we can just do like, this is your standard cloner modifier. Sorry, I don't know why I keep deleting that sunlight, but it makes it harder to see without it. I guess we don't need it in this mode. But, okay, so we have the cloner here, or the modifier. I can actually add another array, but this time, again, I can just click delete over this, and it'll turn into 0. And now I can do like your grid modifier. So it's a little different. It's not like it's not like the cloner has like all those like 5 presets, but you can get to the same thing. Now, one thing that like I love doing in Cinema is you basically clone this. Where's the cloner? Mograph Cloner. And we're going to do grid. And then I'm going to, in here, just make an empty or a plain effector. And I'll have it affect scale. I'll just, oops, didn't mean to do that. -1. Where is this thing? Deformer or fall off. Let's do a sphere. Okay. And I actually want to do -1. I want to like make it small. Oh, so I messed that up because I'm also cloning the, okay. So this is like the bread and butter of Cinema, and And then you just add like a jiggle modifier and it's really awesome. So, you know, honestly, I've searched for Blender tutorials that do Mograph stuff like that. And, you know, it's honestly not as easy. Like, if you're doing a lot of like abstract shapes that move to this, like if that's, yeah, I feel like hopefully someone will make a plugin for Blender, or there's one that I don't know about. But let's see, I don't know. We can try and play around and see if we can get anything close. The shrink wrap modifier is really awesome in this, but let's there's cloth, which I've used, which is really nice. Yeah, but to have it like scale, so there is like a shader system that I think is new to 2.8 or 2.81 that is shading for like to do exactly what Cinema can do. And I've seen people on the Blender forums do that, but you have to do like a node graph type thing to get that result. So like I think like the default base thing, sadly, or maybe after this video is posted to YouTube, put a comment if you know how to do it. But I think the best way to do it is probably through that new shader thing that I haven't touched, so I actually haven't been able to do it well. And I did search tutorials for this and was pretty disappointed. For me, I'm usually making like video game assets or like 3D UIs or product renders. So like I really love the precision of the modeling, the texturing, the UV, and the rendering, and the rigging. And this kind of like bread and butter is generally not stuff that I do, because I would just do this in Unity with like a vertex shader. And I mean, a lot of amazing stuff can be made with this, but yeah, so I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer to how to do that. I'm gonna leave another minute if anyone else has any more questions. And feel free to keep asking, Aspen, no problem. I mean, I can just make like a sphere and a plane. And then I'll make this a collision object, and I'll make this a soft body. Actually, let's make this a cloth. Delete the armature. Yeah, there's like this type of stuff, but yeah, that's not the same as the Mograph field cloner magic that Cinema has. There's also a way to fill cloth objects with air, which this guy, Andrew, if I forget his name, from Polygon, what's his Blender Guru, that guy, he posted recently, but I haven't tried that, so I'm not sure how he filled it with air, but it was cool for making things like pillows. You can add a subdivision on this, you can smooth it. Best keyboard shortcut to know in Blender. I think the key is really like, if you click Option and then, sorry guys, I need to figure out, is this right click or, I'm gonna just freaking tell you. Okay, top was middle click. So if you click Option and middle click, it's basically like the same as S in Cinema. So it basically changes the origin point focus. Basically just learning how to navigate the viewport, clicking tab to go between object and edit mode, E for extrude, 1, 2, 3 for vertex, edge, face, option click for edge loop selecting. So if I am in edge mode and I option click, I just automatically select edge loop, Control R for cutting, and then honestly I think that's most of what I do. If you're in sculpting, like you want to press F to change the brush width or size, and then Shift F to change the radius, and then in texture painting it's the same. It's like F to change the brush size and Shift F for opacity. I feel like if you know those, it's kind of like most of it. X to delete, and then F to fill. And again, there's like this amazing tool where you can just create polygons almost out of nothing. So like here, I could just click F. Oh, maybe it could, oh, sorry, and also Alt Z to toggle between X-ray and non-X-ray. You can do Z for this, but I don't actually use that. So X to delete. What else is there? G to move, S to scale, R to rotate. If you double tap R, so if you, I also didn't mention this, but yeah, if you double tap R, you can get into like more of a, it's hard to describe, to be honest. This is like rotating based on your viewport angle. And then if you do double tap on R, it's more like, I don't know, it's almost like you're touching it and you're rotating it based on where your mouse is. And the other thing is if you click, let's say move, and if you press Z, it goes along whatever axis you click, so X, Y, and Z. One thing that's kind of whack is Z is the Y-axis. Like every other program, this would be the Y-axis, but Blender it's Z. If you click Shift and let's say Z, it moves on everything but the Z. So that's really nice. And you can do that with Shift X and Shift Y. So I'm usually doing Shift Z because I'm like moving things on a plane. Shift D to duplicate, and then Shift Z that to move it along the floor. Shift A to create the create anything really. Create geometry, or where's shading, or create a shading node. So yeah, I think you kind of need to know all those. You kind of hold Alt and middle click to snap. You have to gesture also with the mouse. So like if I'm moving this way and I hold Alt, I can snap to the different angles really quickly. It's middle click to rotate. I use default preferences, but I use a tablet, so it's middle click to rotate, shift middle click to move, and then control middle click to zoom in and out. I think that, oh, and then yeah, I use F2 to rename things without having to like go up here. And I do F3 to like, to get that just command search thing up. So yeah, it is a lot of shortcuts. I tried downloading like Andrew, the Blender Guru shortcut list, but I don't know. I can't just read shortcuts off a sheet of paper. So like, I feel like I just need to like keep using it, and then you get it. You can add reference or background images, which is kind of nice. You don't need to like create a plane and then make a material and then apply it to that. I don't know if I have I think I have like a Kira image. So now I have like a reference image. It automatically creates it. It highlights it as different. And then, you know, it has the image actually here, so I could actually change the image if I wanted. It essentially is a plane, but it's just way quicker. And because my thing was in a weird angle, it put it there, but I could just go to rotation, click backspace, backspace, and now we're at 0, 0, everything. We'll just create 2 materials. Because I did mention this, but I didn't show it. So if, say I make this cube blue, whatever, let's make this cube blue. I can actually just put my mouse over this without clicking, just putting the mouse over. I do Control C, and then I go to this cube and I do Control V. It's pretty nice. And you can do that with all values. All right, y'all. That was probably too much information. I think the takeaway is when you get used to shortcuts, it's worth the pain. If you're into doing like character modeling or rigging or, I don't know, the full 3D pipeline, it's just better. Specifically for motion graphics, yeah, the Mograph tools are better. So like in Cinema. So Cinema's like got Blender beat when it comes to this type of stuff. But everything else, Blender beats it, in my opinion. Okay, I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you had fun, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.